The PlayStation Vita was way ahead of its time, but let's face it, it flopped. Now, former PlayStation executive Shuhei Yoshida has revealed exactly why it failed, and his insights are actually quite shocking. From bad hardware choices to Sony's own mistakes, there's a lot to unpack. But could Sony learn from these lessons and change the future of handheld gaming in the future? Let's dive in and break it all down. So this article caught my eye over on Eurogamer, and I thought we need to discuss this because you know we love all things handheld PlayStation gaming here on the channel, and if you do love things like that, make sure you subscribe. We've got actual knowledge here from a former Sony executive. So keep in mind, Shuhei Yoshida just retired literally 2 or 3 days ago, so this week. So he's been well in the loop, and he discusses why the Vita failed. The PlayStation Vita almost had Switch-like capabilities, said former PlayStation exec Shuhei Yoshida. Several technical choices we as a company made weren't really good ones. Yes, that is spot on, and I think every single person here who has a Vita will probably know what is about to come, which is why this is even more shocking. So let's go and see what was said. So former PlayStation exec Shuhei Yoshida has discussed why the company's PlayStation Vita handheld didn't sell well, stating Sony didn't have the resources to split between two platforms, but originally it had similar capabilities to the Nintendo Switch. Very interesting. The article goes on. Since its release in 2011, the Vita handheld is estimated to have sold between 10 and 15 million units. So that sounds not bad, okay, that's pretty good, but in comparison is where it blows my mind here. That's far less than the 80 million units of its predecessor, so the PSP, that sold 80 million units. That is massive and shows what a fall from grace the Sony handhelds had, going from the PSP 80 million to the Vita only selling 10 to 15 million. We don't even know the exact figure, and I think that's because Sony is keeping it under wraps. But then it gets worse. That's even less than the Wii U. I know, like, literally everybody had a Wii, but nobody I know had a Wii U. Like, literally nobody bought the thing. Whether you love it or hate it, that's not what we're talking about. This is just facts. I can't believe that the Vita sold less than the Wii U, and yet the Vita was such an incredible machine. It literally felt like you were holding the future in your hands. And then the article says it also sold less than the GameCube. I mean, I love my Nintendo consoles as well, but I really thought that the PS Vita, sorry, would have sold more than the Wii U. So that is the first thing that really surprised me about this article. So he was speaking on the kind of funny Gamescast. It's like their video podcast thing. I'll leave a link down below in the description if you want to go and check it out. But he goes into more detail here of why he felt that the Vita failed and was not a success, like, you know, the PSP or any of the consoles. So he went on to say there are multiple reasons why the Vita didn't work. He said, it worked in a way that people loved playing games, especially indie games on the PS Vita. It was lovely hardware. I don't think anyone disagrees with this. Still to this day in 2024, I can pick this thing up, I can put it on, the touch screen, the OLED screen, I can play games on this, and it still feels incredible. If Sony sold this in 2020, why did I say 2024? It's 2025. You know what it's like, do you get that thing where you keep saying the wrong year for a while, you know, until you realise it's actually changed year? Anyway, enough chit chat. If this launched in 2025, it would still feel amazing, right? So there it is, I agree with that. Lovely hardware, absolutely. Several technical choices we as a company made weren't really good ones. Now, I think we know where he's going to go with this one, because I think everyone who's had a Vita moans about this and still moans about this to this day unless you buy an adapter. And it's going to be the proprietary memory. Why, oh why, Sony? So let's see what he said. He continued, one of which was the proprietary memory cards. That was a mistake. People had to spend more money to get the memory cards. This is the part that is the most shocking to me, because clearly inside Sony they knew this, or they were having conversations about it. Why did they not change that? Like, before release, it just is so stupid. It is like just cutting off your nose to spite your face here, because I actually think that was the biggest thing is why the Vita didn't sell as well, because people had to fork out for an already expensive bit of hardware and then spend a lot more to be able to play their games, because they had to buy one of these memory cards, because the OG beautiful original Vita OLED here didn't actually have memory on it. You needed to buy one. The slim model did have, I think, 2 gigabytes on it, but this had nothing. So you had to buy that to play your games, which was just wild. I really don't know why they did that. But anyways, there's more to this. It keeps going on. It's a really good interview, actually. So further, he admitted the back touch was not necessary. So yes, the back of the Vita is like touch sensitive, so you can use that to control games. And there's a few games that use it really well, but I guess that could have been omitted to save some money and make the device more profitable for Sony, or they could have sold it at a cheaper price and hopefully sell more units. He goes on, sometimes the team made amazing prototypes that felt so good and that misled everyone involved. That's really interesting. So that is something I always think about with games when they're previewed. Think about a lot of the games that jump to my mind in recent history. I know this is an Xbox game, but like Redfall, and then on PlayStation we had Concord. Internally, people are playing these games and reviewing them and checking them out, and they're great, they're going to be amazing, and they release and they're just absolute garbage. So this must happen with hardware also. So not that the Vita was garbage, it wasn't. It was absolutely amazing and I love it. I still use mine to this day. But they are clearly seeing something that then the end user will not see when they sell it. So that's a big alarm bell there. So hopefully that's something they sort out. He said, noting that added cost to the hardware. So yeah, they've put all the bells and whistles on the prototype and it makes it way more expensive. Similarly, the OLED screen increased the production cost of each unit. Now this is a tasty one, spicy one. The OLED screen on the original Vita is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at this thing in this day and age, still absolutely pops off the screen. I know the slim model has an LCD panel, it's a slightly bigger screen. I'd really need to get my hands on one of the slim Vitas. If you've got one, let me know what color you've got. I'd really like to get a blue, red or white shelled one. They look really cool. But yeah, if they did omit this, I guess back in the day, people probably wouldn't have bothered as much because it is a very small screen, but I think this is one of the reasons why it's so heavily endeared to us gamers, is that it is such a beautiful screen. It is just fantastic. I mean, this is like over a decade old and it is just wow. It is so freaking good. So good. You would not think this is as old as it actually is. So I know what he's saying there and I do agree with him, but I'm glad that they did go with the OLED screen because it is perfecto. Additionally, the Vita dev kit had a video output that allowed the handheld to connect to screens, but this was removed for the consumer release. Now that is an interesting one. It was really a bad idea, Yoshida joked in a nod to the Switch's capabilities. The development team removed that feature just to save a few cents of cost. A few cents? Imagine if PlayStation launched this and it was like the Switch, but way back in the day. So you could just plug this in and then play all your games on your telly. They did release the PlayStation TV later on, which you could use with this, but I guess that's different from what they're talking about here, which would have been a much more cheaper solution, I imagine. Just plugging a cable from your Vita into your TV, and then this basically becomes your controller, and then you're playing it on the big screen. That could have been quite cool. Not the same thing as a Switch, but still very cool. So Yoshida then concluded, I think the biggest reason the Vita didn't do as well as we had hoped was that we had to spread all of our efforts and resources into 2 different platforms and we didn't have the resource. So this is like why or one of the reasons that the Nintendo Switch has been so successful. So Nintendo now don't have their like home console and their handheld. So remember, they've always had like their Game Boy, the DS, you know, whatever it is, and then they've had the home console alongside that, and then development has been split across the two platforms. They then released the Switch, and you have the Switch is basically your handheld and your home console, and you have your two teams of developers, or I'm keeping it simple saying two teams here, there'll be hundreds of teams all now making for one platform. What a difference that makes. So that's another interesting point here, which I do agree would have probably made a big difference, especially when he goes on to say we did not have a big enough talent pool across its studios, Sony didn't, to support both its home consoles, so the PS3, the PS4 and the Vita. So that's 3 systems. I don't think anyone could really support that as well as you would want. So that's interesting from a strategic point of view. Why did they then release the Vita when they did? They could have timed that a lot better, maybe when the PS3 was completely on the way out and it was just PS4 and Vita, or something completely different. But as we'll go on to see here, Sony picked the home consoles, and as the consoles were more popular, they were prioritized, which meant the Vita had a bit of a slow death and did not get the support it deserves for such fantastic hardware. This, Yoshida believes, is why Nintendo has been successful, as the rival company has pooled its resources into a single platform with dual capabilities. Just what we spoke about there. He even joked that the Switch 2 is the Vita 2. The Switch 2 is the Vita 2? I don't think so, Yoshida. We actually want a real Sony-built Vita 2 or PSP 2 or PSP 3, maybe you could call it that because you had the Vita. I don't know. I think the market is right and ready for a Sony handheld, and the rumors are they're working on it, so I really hope that this happens here. And the last part they discussed on this topic was still PlayStation's legacy. Said Yoshida is providing cutting edge technology at affordable prices, so there was never a discussion of combining efforts into a single piece of hardware as Nintendo did. And that may have been a critical error. So out of these issues which we have discussed about our beloved PlayStation Vita, what do you think was the worst ones, the one that actually caused the downfall of this device? So they're saying there it's about the support. I'm not so sure that is the biggest one, because there was still some awesome first party games, some big heavy hitters, some really good exclusives. I'm working on a video on that just now, so stay tuned for that. But for me, it is the proprietary storage, because that's an issue throughout the whole life cycle of the Vita. It stifles sales throughout the whole life cycle, and because it stifles sales right away, not as many units are sold, and then because not as many units are sold, Sony then looks at it and goes, that's not selling as well, let's not focus support on that, let's prioritize the PS3 or the PS4, which is selling well. So if this just had non-proprietary storage that was much cheaper, you know, your kind of micro SD cards or whatever it was back then, that would have made a huge difference. It would have been much more palatable for gamers to fork out the cash for this. So I think that's actually the biggest issue here for the Vita, and what caused the most damage to it, in my opinion. They did then try and cut costs and bring price down with the slim model, which, as I said, I do not have. I want to get my hands on. It does look absolutely fantastic, but it is really insightful and hopeful that Sony has learned their lesson. And there has been some examples that they have, but there has also been some warning bells that maybe they have not. So we know that they are looking at a new dedicated handheld, so let's call that the Vita 2 for simple talking sake here. So have they learned to not shove proprietary stuff down gamers' throats, which increases the cost and maybe gamers don't really want? Well, if you look at the PS5, I would say yes, they have. So when the PS5 launched alongside the Xbox Series S and X, if you wanted to expand your storage, on Xbox you had to buy proprietary memory cards or memory sticks, whatever you want to call them, which plug into the back of the device, and they were extortionate and they are still very expensive. Whereas Sony went down the route of allowing you to just buy a NVMe SSD drive, and you could put that in. Granted, it was a bit more complicated. You had to get a screwdriver and open the device up, but it was really quite simple. You know, there's a ton of YouTube tutorials. We've even got one on the channel showing you how to do it. Versus the Xbox, you literally just plugged it in. But you were paying a hell of a lot for that convenience. So that's good. That looks like they've went, yes, that's the way to go. Not some expensive Sony proprietary memory card. Imagine we had Sony memory cards in 2024, 2025. That'd be hilarious. Anyways, they didn't do that, so that's great. Maybe they're learning. But then along comes the PlayStation Portal, which we all know and love. Well, I love it. You might not, but I do. It's great. But again, the proprietary technology started wriggling its way in. It's as if Sony just couldn't help themselves. They just had to. And that was with this link technology for your audio in the game. So if you're wanting to use your headphones or headset, it needs to be a PlayStation Link compatible headset. You can't use your Bluetooth gaming headset, which you have lying around. Ugh, really annoying. Why? Anyways, it's happened. They've done it. So I hope that they do not do anything like that when they launch the next PlayStation Vita, because we don't want this to be a flop. A PlayStation Vita which can play PS4 and PS5 games, and maybe by then they'll sort out all the backwards compatibility so you could play PS1 right through to PS5 or PS6 games. That thing would sell like hotcakes. I would be lining up to buy that on day one. Let me know if you would be lining up to buy that on day one. And if you want to know more about what's going on with the new standalone, when I say standalone, I mean PlayStation Handheld, which doesn't need to stream games from the cloud or from your PlayStation like the Portal does, check out the video on screen to find out what is going on behind the scenes.